Reptiles of the Northern Australian Bush. Hi, my name is Ramsey. I'm a biologist and I make my living by working as a lecturer and a guide, mostly on expedition ships. I then like to spend that money by travelling and photographing plants and animals around the world, and then spend even more money by publishing them in field guides and on website. And then I wonder why I don't have any money. Today I'm here to introduce you to some of the reptiles of Northern Australia's bush, the savanna woodlands or the dry forest or the grasslands. Now, we occasionally see some of these species on our expeditions along the Kimberley coast, and these seasonally wet and dry habitats include some of our most familiar animals and some of our prettiest animals, and also some of our rarest animals. The reptile fauna also includes some of our most dangerous animals, species that can kill you with their bite, and the only species in Australia that can actually eat you. But the majority of reptiles are harmless, and many are quite beautiful. This, of course, is a gecko, one of the most remarkable and distinct groups of reptiles, for a few different reasons. Many species have evolved the ability to walk up walls, including the glass in this photo, which I took in Darwin. They are the only lizards that regularly make sounds. In fact, the very name gecko is an imitation of a call. And unlike most other reptiles, their scales are quite tiny, giving them a very soft look and feel. So geckos are soft and mostly harmless, and we only occasionally pick them up when we are doing surveys or taking images for identification, as here. But you have to be very careful. One of their most amazing techniques is to escape a big fat predator like me, is to suddenly drop its tail and escape my grasp. The tail will often continue to wriggle to further distract the catcher. It's a great technique, but it does cost the animal, and when the tail eventually grows back, it usually looks quite different from the rest of their body, as you can see in this photograph. This ability to climb smooth surfaces has enabled some species to adapt well to the artificial surfaces of human habitation, and the most commonly seen species around tropical Australia is in fact an introduced species from Southeast Asia. It can be found in tropical homes worldwide, including across most of northern Australia, where suburban Australians are used to hearing that distinctive call, that and as they catch and eat the moths around our house lights, unfortunately they also poo everywhere, including all over our books and in our computers and probably in our cups and plates. And when they fight, they often knock themselves off the ceilings and walls. So when you are asleep, it's probably a good idea not to lie on your back with your snoring mouth open, or you might end up with a gecko in your gob. Most of our geckos are quite small, but not all of them. Pictured on the right is the western giant cave gecko, and they can be over 20 centimetres long. They are endemic to the northwest of Australia, restricted to the caves in the Kimberley. Another group, well, people often think of dragons as a mythical group, but they do exist, and they are a distinct family of lizards known as the agamids. They are found throughout the Old World tropics, that is Africa, Asia and Australasia, and are very diverse and obvious in Australia's northern tropics. You can usually recognise them by their large squarish head, like this pagona, that's a type of bearded lizard, and they usually have very long, thin, whip-like tails. There are many different species that live in many different habitats. Most species tend to live on the ground, and when they need to escape, they can get up and run with their hind, long-toed feet, like a crazy circus clown running in those long, floppy shoes. Other species tend to be a bit more arboreal, that is, perching on the branches or trunks of trees. And there are some weird and wonderful characters in the dragon family. Some species are much more comfortable in or near water, such as the quite famous, large, spiky and often colourful eastern water dragon of the eastern part of Australia. Some dragons have peculiar territorial signals, like lifting their front legs off the ground one at a time, technically called a circumduction movement, which makes them look like they are waving at you and gives them the common name of tartar lizards across northern Australia. If you see a small lizard scuttle by when in northern Australia, you are probably looking at a skink. They are a very successful family and found in every habitat across Australia. On this continent, there are in fact more species of skink than any other type of vertebrate animal. And it is not just the geckos that can climb walls, so can these snake-eyed skinks, the Cryptoblepharis. These rather thin and shiny lizards are good at climbing rock surfaces, so they are one of the most common lizards we see on the Kimberley expeditions, because we see them climbing around on the Aboriginal rock art sites. And many skinks are even more beautifully coloured. This is an appropriately named fire-tailed skink, the Marethia. And they get even more colourful when it is sexy time during the mating season, and when the males want to look good to impress the girls. That's when their throat also goes a bright red colour. And then there are the big boys, the biggest of all the lizards. In Africa, sitting at water holes and looking like they're watching over them, they got the name monitor. In Australia, we tend to call them goannas, or joannas as one of my British co-workers like to call them. One group of species are well adapted to living in rocky habitats, being really long and thin and have quite a squashed, flat look about them. And they include such species as the Kimberley rock monitor in the upper photograph and the black palmed monitor in the lower image. Other species are more adapted to living in and around fresh water. You can see the tail on this species here is laterally compressed, so it's squeezed from the side with a ridge on top, shaped like a butter knife or better yet, a paddle. So it's very good for slicing through the water when they swim. And only the 2 species of water monitors have this particular shape tail. And speaking of specialized tails, this is the spiny tail monitor. To show the most distinctive feature of this species, and the one that it's named for, I have to change the f-stop on my lens and produce a larger focus plane. So there we go. And that's the spiny tail of the spiny tail monitor. I've only seen this species once, and these are the photographs I took at the time. And here is a close-up. You can see the incredible evolution of these spines from the scales. The biggest monitor is not quite found in Australia, but to some islands slightly north of us in Indonesia, around the islands of Komodo. This, of course, is the Komodo dragon. But it is basically a giant goanna and has much of the same behaviours. Like the other goannas, they flick out their tongue, which is forked, and when they do this, they're tasting the molecules in the air. And with that split in the 2 ends, they can determine direction, much like we can with our 2 ears, one on each side of our big square heads. Now, of course, there is another group of reptiles that flick their tongue in and out. Snakes seem to have evolved from their relatives, the lizards, and they have been incredibly successful, with many different families all over the world, living on every continent except for Antarctica. The biggest snakes are the pythons. They have large heads which are distinct from their body and large eyes. The good news for us is that they are non-venomous, but the bad news is that they have a backwards curving teeth. So if you do try to pick one up and get bitten, it may not let go and it will hurt and bleed a lot. But their most distinctive feature are their lips. Along the bottom part of their mouth, there are very obvious dents in the scales. Well, what do? How do they work? Well, it's quite a simple system, really. Information from the labial pit is directly to the contralateral optic tectum via the lateral descending trigeminal tract, bypassing the nucleus. Well, okay, these pits basically sense heat, and it's not just for prey detection, but it's also used for avoiding predators. And it's also used in their thermoregulation to check out where is a good place to go and bask and warm up in the sun. In northern Australia, the longest and heaviest snakes are also the pythons. In the eastern tropical woodlands, the scrub python, Somalia kinghornii, is the largest predator on land. They have been recorded up to about 5 metres long, that's over 16 feet for the old fogies, and they have been known to not to swallow a full human, although there are stories of them trying, and they regularly gulp down bandicoots and rock wallabies. The most common snakes around most of the world are the colubrids. This is good because they tend to be only mildly venomous. They don't generally have bites that are fatal to normal humans. This is an example of a colubrid snake found in the northern Australian woodlands, a pair of slaty grey snakes. One of the most commonly seen snakes in this family, even around urban areas, is the brown tree snake. It's sometimes also called doll's eyes or the night tiger. Unfortunately, many Australians see this and think they are seeing a taipan. But even though the bite of this species is venomous and painful, it is generally not regarded as fatal. The brown tree snake, or night tiger, climbs trees, obviously, and it makes a very efficient hunter, looking for and finding and swallowing the eggs of birds. They can also climb rocks and even crawl upside down. They also hunt for bats in these sort of habitats, and they sometimes hang out at the entrance to caves, waiting to snatch bats in mid-flight. This is the common tree snake. It's a geographically very widespread species, and throughout its range it occurs in a variety of flavours, or colours and versions, including this one with the yellow back and the bluish sort of head, and quite a few other variations across northern Australia. The one in the upper left there is so-called yellow-bellied black. In the bottom left there's the green tree snake version. And then in the right, I took this photo at Hinchinbrook, is the blue version, some blue tints to the scales underneath. On a global scale, the species in this generally non-fatal family outnumber the more fatal elapid snakes. the group that contains the more highly venomous species such as cobras and taipans. There is only one place in the world where the venomous snakes, the elapids, outnumber the less venomous ones. That is Australia. Now, some of these elapids are pretty small and thin, and they might make you a bit sick if they bite you, but they won't necessarily kill you. This is the case with the appropriately named whip snakes, usually. This one is a little wound up looking as we had just rescued him from the water. But the snakes that most Australians are most paranoid about include things like brown snakes and black snakes in this family, and then of course the one that everyone's quite paranoid about, which are the taipans. This is one of the most venomous snakes in the world. Now, I took this close-up photo of a coastal taipan, but as a captive specimen. You didn't think I was going to get close in the wild, did you? The good news is we don't really see snakes that often in the tropics. There are many species and they can be quite hard to identify. So what we try to do is identify snakes correctly, and to be accurate, we often have to look at the scale counts and patterns. So it might be helpful to tell the difference between a snake in the highly venomous elapid family and a snake in the not so deadly colubrid family. Now I can show you this. Next time you see a snake, get nice and close and take a good look at its face. Here is a taipan, one of the most dangerous elapids. Now you should be able to notice that there is a scale before the eye. This is the preocular scale. And then the next scale along towards the front or the snout is the one that contains the nostril, right? Okay, now this is a not so deadly colubrid. Again, there is that scale before the eyes, and at the end of the snout there's the scale that contains the nostril. But notice there is an extra scale between that preocular scale and the nostril scale. But if you thought that was all we had to worry about with reptiles, then we still have one more group, the crocodilians. Well, this fella has a lot of teeth and looks quite dangerous, but it's a freshwater or Johnston's crocodile, and they are relatively slim and are basically piscivores. That is, they eat fish, not fat mammals like us. In contrast, here we have the so-called saltwater crocodile, or estuarine crocodile, or Indo-Pacific crocodile, the largest predator in Australia. It's called Indo-Pacific because it has a very large distribution across the tropics of the planet, from India across Australia to Fiji. And because the big, competitive, bitey males will travel long distances to claim new territory, they can end up anywhere. If a crocodile does not want to be seen, you won't see it. So the best way to avoid getting eaten is to simply stay out of the water and away from the water's edge. But what if you are confronted with a killer croc? Well, you could launch a preemptive attack. The closing power of a saltwater crocodile's jaws are extremely strong. They have been calculated to have a more forceful grip than any other animal around today, and any other animals ever lived, including the dinosaurs. But the muscles that control the opening of the jaws are much, much weaker. So if you do see a croc lying there with its jaws open, cooling down, send one of the expedition team members in for a preemptive strike. Sit on its face and close those jaws. But what to do if you do get taken? Well, there are two ways to escape a croc's clutches, and they have both been used by survivors in the past. Probably the most famous one is to poke it in the eyes. Now, there was a young boy attacked while snorkeling in the Timor Sea by a crocodile. He poked the predator in the eye, was let go, and he escaped with his life. The other technique was used by a teacher I met who lived in a village in the Solomon Islands. When a crocodile needs to swallow its prey, it lifts its head up and out of the water to swallow it, to avoid getting water down its throat at the same time. So all you have to do when caught is to get your arm and hand down into its throat and push its tongue down, and he should let you go. So there we have it, a lecture that helps you identify dangerous snakes and how to escape a croc attack. This is the lecture that saves lives. Anyway, folks, thanks for listening.